It's Friday, December 13th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast presented by Toyota, the official automotive partner of the NFL. And it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And joining me to do just that is the man himself. Look at this guy on the other end. Still so festive here on YouTube. I mean,
Always.
Andy Behrens, what's going on, buddy?
I'm good. Fun week, right? Because the Bears can't burden me until Monday night, so I don't even have to think about them on Sunday. It's a pretty good slate on Sunday. Starts a little slow. I feel like the early window is full of mismatches and games that we're maybe not so fired up about, but then, man, the late window is great. The nighttime game is great. I don't know. This is going to be another good week. Plus, we got playoffs starting.
Yeah, we got fantasy playoffs starting, and I love it when the slates are stacked that way. Give me a bunch of kind of nonsense in the early window because at least one or two of those games is going to be frisky and weird and close and, get Scott Hansen get all excited on Red Zone or whatever, talking about the witching hour and all of his little coin phrases over there. That's great. Love it. Love it. Like, let's stack the weird games in the early window so then we can really get our eyes on the good games in the late window and the night, all that. That perfectly designed slate here for week 15, first week of the fantasy football playoffs. We're going to talk through all of it today on this particular show, as we do every single week here on the preview program. Andy Behrens joins me in the first half to address his 3 burning fantasy questions that he wants answered and the 3 matchups that he says deserve your attention. Then Tera Roberts joins me to identify make or break players for week 15, and we will finish it off with our keys to winning. Andy, your 3 burning fantasy questions this week, the utmost important questions of the week per you heading into the fantasy football playoffs. What is question number 1?
Yeah, let's be clear here. These are fantasy questions only. These are not like overriding NFL issues because it's going to feel like it starts a little slow, I guess. But I think it is a pretty relevant fantasy question as to whether Kamani Vidal is about to actually take over the Chargers' backfield. Even if he does, it might only be a game or 2, and then we get J.K. Dobbins back in like week 17, and everything resets to what it was at the start of the year. But man, Vidal, like low key, you might have missed it, just played over 50% of the snaps for the Chargers. First time he's come close to it this season. And man, Gus Edwards, I don't know, just in my view, I think he's been a little bit of a rough watch over the last 2 or 3 weeks. It isn't. And I know he's battled some injuries. He's got some mileage. I do still think that the team is relatively committed to him, right? Like he's Greg Roman's guy. I don't think he's going away, but he did not play a majority of the snaps last week. It was more Vidal's backfield than his. I think Gus still has that short yardage goal line role, so that certainly limits Vidal's opportunities. Also, I'm not one of these people who I'm not one of the Kamani Vidal zealots exactly. I didn't come into this season banging the table that he was going to take over that job or anything like that. He had a wonderful collegiate career. I think he's a fine player. He's been fine. I think he's been okay. I think he's a little bit friskier than Gus Edwards right now, and he's certainly a more versatile player. You can throw it to him, and bad things don't often happen. Now, I say that, but he had like one opportunity in the passing game, and he really needed to convert it, and he didn't last week. So that's a thing. But we've also seen some nice moments from him as a receiver, and I just, man, if this usage ticks up even a little bit more, he can get pretty interesting for fantasy purposes. Obviously, the matchup this week against Tampa Bay, it's a particularly friendly pass defense, but it's not a stay away run defense by any means. So it's a good opportunity for him, and I think he's coming into a lot more work. Again, it all might go away when J.K. Dobbins comes back, assuming he's healthy in week 17.
The one thing I think people don't give enough airspace to is that this Chargers run game just generally hasn't been very good from an efficiency standpoint. J.K. Dobbins has been a great fantasy value pick. It was kind of always going to be somebody from this backfield, right? There were a lot of Kamani Vidal zealots, as you mentioned, the dudes with like 50% best ball exposure to the guy. There are some people like that out there. There were the idiots like me who thought, well, maybe Gus Edwards can find his way into the end zone 8 times this regular season. And then people made the smart bet on J.K. Dobbins because it was probably always, with how committed this team is to the run, it was probably always going to be somebody. But I think that's been the issue is that Dobbins is a great back. Like, he's a really, really good player. And I think it's just, if this was an ecosystem where, they were kicking ass in the run game, I think one of these other guys like Vidal or Edwards even would have already kind of taken the reins without Dobbins back there. But listen, man, I mean, your boy Sincere McCormick is like on the fantasy radar, who faced this Bucs defense last week, by the way, averaged over 5 yards per carry and is apparently now going to do his best Zamir White impression the rest of the regular season. So we'll see. Maybe he can be like the worst 6th round pick you could make in fantasy football next year. We'll see what happens. That was so mean. I'm sorry. That was really mean. Anyways, what the hell was I talking about? Yeah, no, I think that just the fact that McCormick is on the radar, like, we're talking about these, potential hero running, like, and I mean hero running backs in terms of late season kind of rising running backs. Vidal could be that guy, even if this isn't such a great run game, just because it is still a good offense with a good quarterback.
Yeah. And that's the entire appeal, right? It's not perfect schedule down the stretch. They get Denver a week from now. So it could be better, but this Bucs matchup, again, pretty friendly. We've seen plenty of guys go off against that team. And it would only take a little bit more volume for Vidal to really take off. I don't like I've enjoyed Gus Edwards and the Gus Edwards experience over the years. Had him in a bunch of leagues last year. That was pretty profitable. He's a good player at his best. He has not been great this season, and he is not, like, you think of him as a grinder, gets all the tough yards, always falls forward for 2 or 3 yards, and a little bit of that has been missing. I think he's been a little bit more, like the current version of Kareem Hunt this year than the peak version of Gus Edwards. And, we saw immediately this year, as soon as J.K. Dobbins in September showed, some real juice and some real pop, they were perfectly happy to make him the featured guy, and Gus Edwards took a seat, not just like the back seat, but the way back seat. And I can imagine that happening again over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, current this year version of Kareem Hunt is running behind one of the best center guard combinations in the NFL in Kansas City. Not what we've got here with the LA Chargers this year. I don't know. Obviously, I don't even know anything about the upcoming receiver class in the draft, so I certainly don't know anything about the offensive line class in the draft. But whoever is the biggest, baddest, mauling guard in the draft, Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman are going to have their eyeballs on that guy, because I think they're very much needed, which would make this run game even more interesting. And Vidal's a guy that might be able to kind of audition a little bit down the stretch here for a bigger role, both in the postseason, because this team's going to go to the playoffs, and obviously into next year. So I like your call on this one. What is his roster? You know what his roster percentage off the top of your head in Yahoo leagues is? It's got to be pretty low still.
I can give it to you very quickly because I've got him stashed in a couple places. Yeah, it is. Oh, it can't be that low, is it? It's 12%.
I was going to say it has to be very low just because he hasn't had, you know how this stuff is. It's all about, like, have you accidentally scored a touchdown, then you get added in like 40% of leagues.
Yeah. That just tells me that people are just totally unaware of how much he actually saw the field last week. And I know it didn't translate into anything. And again, the biggest moment of the night for him was probably dropping a pass. So it wasn't great. And he only came away with 30 some rushing yards, but still played over 50% of the snaps. That is a really good sign.
Well, you know what, Big Dog? If people aren't aware of it, then it's good that you brought it up on the podcast as your number one burning question. Let's get to your second burning question here in Week 15.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get Michael Penix in Atlanta until that team is fully eliminated from playoff contention, and we're not there yet. But I am open to the idea that we might see Penix at some point. They've lost 4 straight. 3 of those games have been against very good opponents. So they're not, any loss is a terrible loss, but, they're not, shocking losses necessarily. But man, Cousins has thrown 0 touchdown passes in that stretch and 8 picks. And, the ball is not coming out with a lot of zip. This is not last year's pre-injury version of Kirk Cousins. I think that is pretty apparent. I don't know how messy it would actually have to get against the Raiders before they considered a change. It probably doesn't happen in this game, but I also wouldn't rule it out. Like, there have been plenty of weeks where, people have tried to whip up a little bit of a, hey, are we going to see Penix thing? And I didn't really feel it, but I'm kind of feeling it now. I feel like we could be a few drives away, a few failed drives away from Penix getting a real shot.
Okay, so you said you're open to the idea. Do you have any Drake London or Darnell Mooney fantasy teams, Andy Behrens?
Yeah, no, I hear you. I do. I picked up Mooney early in the season in a couple places. I've got Drake London in a couple places. It would obviously be, there are all kinds of issues with Penix, right? Penix needs a wall around him based on what we saw collegiately for him to be particularly successful. It's not... I don't know how much better it would look, but we're also doing that thing in the quarterback change cycle where you're starting to read about how good he looks in practice. I have no idea. I'm not watching Falcons practice, but like, you're starting to see those stories. And oftentimes when we start to get those stories, it feels like change is really inevitable. So it may happen at some point. It's a burning fantasy question because it does have, trickle down effect to receivers who we are just simply starting every week. Even when Cousins isn't playing well, like, we're still getting a random big week from Ray McLeod. We're still getting, the production from Drake London has been fine. Mooney has been fine when he's healthy. So it definitely has some downstream effects if they flip to Penix, but also maybe they should.
Yeah, I've got a Drake London team, and I'm not rooting for this because maybe Penix, like the theoretical upside of him pushing the ball down the field, in between zone coverage, maybe that's there. We did see that in college, obviously, but the known quantity of what Cousins is, which, I mean, obviously the turnovers are just atrocious, but they're still moving the football. They're scoring a lot of rushing touchdowns. They're all, like, I hate to say it, but all these guys in the passing game, Kirk Cousins included, well, not all these guys in the passing game, Mooney and London, let me be clear. Mooney and London are due for positive touchdown regression. Kirk Cousins is probably due for positive passing touchdown regression here. And I mean, this Raiders defense is a man coverage heavy defense, which is what Kirk has been better throwing. So my instinct has been that we're going to get Kirk Cousins throwing a couple of touchdowns on Monday night because, one, he's just #due. Secondly, it is a better matchup for him. But again, I am coping with the fact that I don't want to have a big cycle of, oh my God, we're about to see Michael Penix, and then Michael Penix comes out there and Drake London has 30 yards or something like that. Because at least we're scamming our way to, pretty good, we're not scamming, but we are matriculating our way to some decent Drake London games, some big Darnell Mooney games as mentioned when he's healthy. So I don't know. I am actually a little nervous about the possibility because I'm with you. I think it's on the radar. It's in the zeitgeist. It's funny. There was a weird cycle in the offseason where people were kind of raising an eyebrow at Atlanta media and some of the local reporters, guys, why aren't you reporting about Kyle Pitts at all? We haven't heard anything about Kyle Pitts this summer. And it's well, that's because Kyle Pitts doesn't do anything in this offense for the most part. That is a very weird hyper online fantasy Twitter thing only that people might get. So sorry to the 98% of normal people listening to this podcast that did not understand anything I just said. My point here is that you're right. It's on the radar. It's in the zeitgeist. And the fact that is true, I don't know. It makes me a little nervous.
Yeah. Also, we should, when local beat guys aren't reporting on something, that alone tells us a thing, right? That alone is meaningful. When we're not hearing a lot of buzz on a guy, it's maybe because the guy does not deserve any buzz whatsoever. This is if you just ask me, project Kirk Cousins for this week, I'd probably say 245, 2 touchdowns and 1 interception, something like that. A game that doesn't help you a ton in fantasy, but certainly is enough for them to win and enough for them to arrest this 4-game slide and enough for Kirk to continue to remain as Atlanta's starting quarterback. And that's most likely. It just feels like we're a bad quarter away, another bad interception away, a few stalled drives away from they got to consider making some sort of change, because we can say that, oh, he's due, or he's due for some positive regression here, but also some of these picks have been terrible. They have been totally terrible throws, and I hate to just toss that out as if, oh, all interceptions are and not that you're saying that, but like as if these things are just random occurrences. They were terrible throws, and we have to deal with that fact as well.
All I'm saying is that he's not going to have 0 touchdowns for the rest of the year. He will throw a touchdown again at some point. And I personally want it to go to Drake London or Darnell Mooney. And I think he's probably a better, he's probably a better option to take advantage of what is a really good rest of season schedule.
Yeah.
Raiders this week, Giants in week 16. I mean, that is just an absolute freaking cakewalk. The Commanders in week 17 and Panthers in week 18. I personally think, Andy, that the Falcons have to be eliminated from playoff contention, which is going to be tough to do just because of their division. They had to be eliminated from playoff contention before they consider Penix. Also because, like, let's also, I do think we can acknowledge the fact that I think internally, they won't say this, obviously. They'll never admit it. But I think internally, they've already said 2025, we're going to Penix. Like, it's over for Kirk. They're going to want to try to trade Kirk to some desperate ass team that is willing to take on the contract. And because of that, I also think that's another incentive for them to be like, just let's keep banging our head against the wall and hope that Kirk turns it around and puts some good tape out there for some dumb team to take him on next year.
That is a really good point. And I think that is most likely. And you are so right. That is going to require Kirk to have some actual, like, pretty positive games down the stretch.
It's going to have him require not a 0 to 8 touchdown to interception ratio.
Yes.
All right. Let's get to your third and final burning question.
All right. Third question, and this is where the Bears fandom creeps in, I guess. Is it possible for Rome Odunze to deliver back-to-back quality games, useful fantasy games? The first time he broke out earlier this season, he had 112 yards and a touchdown against the Colts. He followed it with 1 catch for 10 yards. The second time he broke out, which was 5 for 104 at Arizona, he followed it with 3 catches for 23 yards. Now, this is the nature of being just one of a group of 3 or 4 receivers who are very relevant to a team that is not always, going to pile up numbers. And you've got 2 people ahead of him in the pecking order, in Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, who are just always going to get a set number of targets. That is going to be a thing. You went into it a week ago on the podcast and nailed it. Basically, it's not like Odunze is in a situation where we can just lock in, 8-10 targets a week. That's not necessarily true. But I will say, he's coming off in an otherwise forgettable and regrettable game. He's coming off a 2 touchdown performance against the Niners. Looked really good. The first touchdown in particular, just a great grab. He's had a bunch of impressive moments this season. He's also, I consider him a key player moving forward for my favorite team, because there have also been plenty of moments this year where he is just clearly not in sync with Caleb Williams. But if those two ever really lock in, I think it still has a chance to be pretty special. I'm very interested to see how he follows up last week's big game in a pretty friendly spot. I mean, Minnesota, we've discussed them at many points throughout the season. It is a defense that will give up some yards and they will give up some fantasy points, and they are trying to take down the quarterback and they're trying to turn you over, and they are a little bit agnostic to yards against. So there are opportunities here.
Yeah, and this is one of the few defenses that Caleb Williams has played well against, weirdly enough. And that was the first game post Shane Waldron, right? And like with Thomas Brown calling plays, if I remember correctly, right?
Was it the first game? Yeah, it was probably the first game.
Yeah, I think it was the first game. And the tough part about that is that now Thomas Brown is an entirely different job, which is the play calling head coach, and like he was doing a bunch of things last week that were like typical head coaching stuff, not trying to figure out like, all right, how do I solve this blitz or whatever? How do I adjust this protection here? And I feel like that lack of time expressed itself in what you called a very regrettable, and I think aptly called it a regrettable offensive performance. I just have a tough time thinking there's any sustainability in this Odunze breakout. I love Odunze. I'm a big fan, but like he had 5 targets. DJ Moore had 8. Keenan Allen had 5. He in terms of first read targets, DJ Moore far led the way there because he's the designed target guy. So yeah, I mean I think it's very possible we get another 2 catch 40-yard game or something like that for Odunze because he is still the guy getting most of the deep looks. And yeah, I do feel very strongly that like 2025 will be his year, especially if Keenan Allen moves on.
Yeah.
But for the rest of this year, I think it's just going to be tough.
Yeah, this has become, I mean, it probably has been all year, and I've just been slow to adopt to it. But this is a really thorny receiving core to rank each week when you go into it. I never know exactly how high I should be on Keenan Allen. I feel like I had him buried too deep in the ranks and was too pessimistic early because Keenan has had several games where, he's starting to look a little dusty. And then, he has like the great game against the Lions. Like there's still a dude in there who can really play. But we don't necessarily see it every week. So I feel like I've been wrong on him a lot. I feel like I spent the first half of the season too optimistic on DJ Moore, and they never figured it out. And when they did figure it out, I've been slow to adapt to that. And now we get these Odunze spike weeks, and I keep talking myself back into Odunze because there have been moments in almost every game where, and they don't always connect, right? Like the last throw in that miserable game on Thanksgiving against the Lions was actually a pretty beautiful ball to Rome Odunze. It shouldn't have come down to that, and obviously they should have run more than one play. They should have taken the timeout, all that, but they could have hit that throw. Like that was a great ball, and he got himself turned around and didn't catch it. And there've just been so many, not just near misses, but we're inches away from a real splash play that. Maybe it's too much to say it could turn around a season, but could really make you feel better about the 2 players involved. And they've just had so many near connections that failed all year.
Yep. Sounds like the Bear season.
It really does.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Obviously, I'm really curious to see how this team finishes down the stretch. I don't think, there's any like hope for anybody on the staff, obviously, even like Thomas Brown, who seems like an intriguing coach, but I think they just got to clear things out next year and start over. And I do think they got to cut down the amount of players in this offense just so, yeah, I mean, there a lot of times you're right. Odunze and Williams have not been on the same page. Probably would have been easier for them to be on the same page if this was like his guy all year long, and like they're building that chemistry. So, although I say that, and sure hasn't worked out for Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison in Arizona, and that it. So who knows? Rookie receivers are tough, and the aging receiver thing is really difficult too. As I always say, it's like that's the hardest thing to pinpoint exactly like what a decline looks like. And I do think too often on the outside, people either just ignore a declining player and be like, oh, he's the same guy. Like it's the name, or like, oh, he's declined. He's immediately useless, which is not what Keenan Allen is. Yeah. He's not a useless player, but obviously he's just not the same version of himself. So we'll see what happens with the Bears the rest of the way. That's going to be an intriguing game to watch there because Minnesota needs all the wins they can get. Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to take our first break. We come back. Andy's going to talk through 3 matchups that he says deserve your attention right after this. All right, we're back. Andy, big game here. Your first matchup that you say people need to be paying attention to. I think people will be paying plenty of attention to Bills at Lions.
Yeah, nobody needed me to lead them to Bills Lions. It's an obvious great game. It is a plausible Super Bowl preview. Really, really fun. We have the MVP favorite against a team that no one has been able to stop, an offense that no one's been able to stop. Man, the total in this thing is huge. The total, last time I looked at it, was 53.5. Detroit, a 2.5 point favorite in this one. Just an incredibly fun matchup. It's probably just as easy. I mean, Detroit is always this way, but it's probably just as easy as like just start all these guys. You're not, obviously, there are some choices on the Buffalo side, right? I don't think there aren't a lot of decisions to be made with Detroit. Maybe Jameson Williams, but I always err on the side of starting players like Jameson Williams because they have, if they hit in a given week, you win, like they tilt your matchup. Buffalo's receiving core, a little bit more complicated, I suppose. Khalil Shakir is just sort of a locked in wide receiver too. Amari Cooper, great to see last week, like the increase in target volume. This feels like a good matchup for him. This feels like, both teams are just going to have to be like pedal to the floor for the entire game in this one. It's pretty easy to talk yourself into the idea that this could be we could just be running back the Rams game, right? Which I would take. That was thrilling. That was really, really fun. The one vulnerability maybe that you can see here on either team, Buffalo has not been great against the run to this point in the season. They give up 4.7 yards per carry, sixth most fantasy points to opposing running backs. And that could be pretty decisive here, because if you let Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson just run it down your throat all game, they will do that. And they have Jahmyr Gibbs and they have David Montgomery. They're fully capable of it. So that could be a real problem, and it could be the thing that keeps Josh Allen off the field, right? Gibbs and Montgomery are both over 1,000 scrimmage yards already, probably both going to finish with over 1,000 rushing yards, which seems like a thing that you would only see in like the 1970s or something, but it's happening right now. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, no, it is super fun. And like, I agree with your point here that the Bills' defensive weakness has definitely been versus the run. And how are they not just going to pound the rock over and over and over again? I mean, there's nothing you would do with that information from a fantasy perspective, because you're not benching Amon-Ra St. Brown. Don't care how it turns out. You're just not going to do it. You're not going to, maybe you don't play Jameson Williams. You kind of know what the deal is with Jameson Williams. He can make or break your week all in one play. So maybe he's not somebody that you play necessarily in this matchup. But again, I can say that, and he could rip you a big play in just one route. Like, that's how it goes. Even your guy Sam Laporta has gotten good usage of late, so he might be back kind of on the radar as a guy that you can start and not feel embarrassed about it. But again, I do think that this is a run first game plan on Detroit's side. And Andy, I kind of feel the same way on the Buffalo side here, because you mentioned Khalil Shakir, who's a great player. He's coming off a magnificent performance.
Yeah.
But Detroit has been weak against the slot receiver over the course of the season, but of late, they're like one of the best teams at limiting slot production. I think they've mixed some things up coverage-wise on the back end, and there's also a lot of injuries in their front seven. Aleen McNeil did get back to practice, but DJ Reader is still probably not going to play in this game. They have issues at linebacker. This feels like a game where I think Buffalo could actually say, hey, yeah, this is what we do, man. Last week, we could open it up with the pass game. Sure. Throw a bunch of go balls to Amari Cooper down the sideline, rip it up with Khalil Shakir in the slot. But we also could pound the hell out of the rock ourselves. And I wonder if this could end up being a really big James Cook game.
I wouldn't mind a James Cook game. That would probably, of all the scenarios here, that might actually help me personally the most. I think we also get Dalton Kincaid and Keon Coleman probably back for this one, which is a guy. Obviously, Keon Coleman is one of those. He's not exactly like Jameson Williams, but in terms of fantasy appeal, he's kind of that same guy, right? Where it only takes one play, and there are going to be some moments that aren't great, but man, if he pops one, which he has a good chance to do, it changes your whole week. So I think he's back on the radar. Cooper, again, a really interesting player here. I like, just while we're thinking about Khalil Shakir, he's not having, he's not an all-pro this year. He's not having the best receiver season. It's probably one of my favorite seasons among the entire pool of receivers. Like, he's catching 80% of his targets. I know they're like short range, 4 yards downfield kind of targets. 80% of your targets for any wide receiver is a great rate. His yards after catch, and obviously they saw that in the signature touchdown a week ago. His yards after catch this year have just been crazy. 8.3 yards after catch. He a guy who is barely catching, most of his receptions are at the line of scrimmage or just past it, is averaging over 11 yards per catch on the year. He's just been absolutely tremendous. I think he still leads all receivers in missed tackles forced on the season. Just a really fun year, really special player. And it's I know I've said it before, but it's the rare case where somebody does something that seems pretty great in a very small sample, and you kind of roll your eyes at the idea that they'll be able to sustain it on a much larger workload, and he's done it perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough good things about Khalil Shakir. Absolutely love the player. He's a baller. Very big fan. I buy him as a continued force in this offense going forward. I buy him as the most important receiver in this offense going forward. And really, yeah, it comes down to a lot of the other players coming back here. I mean, Amari Cooper had this big game last week and didn't even play a full complement of snaps. Keon Coleman, what's his route percentage going to look like? We haven't seen him in a long time. And I mean, his role and Cooper's kind of overlap. They still play Matt Collins a ton. Curtis Samuel's giving him something every now and again. Dalton Kincaid. I mean, just whatever. He's not been that big of a factor for this offense, at least in terms of like production. So I don't know. It's a big open question as to what goes on in the rest of this receiver room. And I do still trust Shakir the most, even if he's a guy who is, he's facing a tougher matchup statistically. Let's move to your next game here. Steelers at Eagles. This one's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I like both teams are interesting for their own reasons. The Eagles are a little bit of a soap opera right now, though, and I don't want to make too much of a fantasy story about that, but man, like the AJ Brown locker room response to questions last week about what was the exact question? It was something like AJ, what are the things we need to what are the things the offense needs to improve on? And his one word answer of passing was just so curt and so direct and so biting. It felt like more than sometimes it's just a diva wide receiver who wants more opportunities. It felt a little more personal than that. And there's plenty of other stuff that is bubbling up in Philadelphia. Just like this team is so freaking red hot.
Always
they have the best defense in the league. They have the best running back in football. They have, there's all these great storylines here. Kind of feels like they don't like each other.
Yeah, I mean, there was the Brandon Graham podcast appearance where he said they're they used to be close and then they're not, and then he kind of walked it back. And AJ Brown talked yesterday. Full disclosure, I think this whole controversy is like the dumbest thing of all time. I can't believe that every morning in the gym I walk past the TV and like ESPN is still talking about this. It's like, yo, he wasn't wrong. Like, what are we talking? Like they had sub 6 yards per attempt against the damn Panthers. If Leggett catches that pass, they might lose that game. Yeah. They might lose that game against the Panthers, and you're the Eagles, and it's because their passing game is really not that dangerous right now. I think it seems harsher than it is because he just said one word, and like obviously again the hot take artists are like passing. He hates Jalen Hurts. And then Brandon Graham's comment kind of maybe lended something else to it, and then AJ Brown this week said, yeah, I meant the whole passing game, and Brandon Graham is like just talking about something. Like, we love BG, but like I don't know what I don't really know what he's talking about. So seems just there's always something there in Philadelphia, right? That's the reality of it for sure. But I mean, whether I don't think he's just clamoring for the ball more. I think he's right that like, hey man, if this passing game is what it is and they go to the playoffs with this passing game, they can certainly not make the Super Bowl run that they're definitely capable of the rest of the roster.
Yeah, I'm not saying he was wrong. I guess I'm just saying that it is a thing that wouldn't be under normal circumstances discussed quite as directly with media members as it seemed to be brought up. I was pretty just watching his comments like in real time. I was surprised at how direct they were. Again, not wrong, nothing wrong about it. Yeah. It's all correct. It's just a little bit more. It's just a little bit more honesty than one would normally expect. It seems like there might be a little bit more to it. They're a great team, and no surprise if they end up in the Super Bowl. And it's a phenomenal defense. There's a lot of things to like here. Obviously, Saquon's having a crazy year. That's going to be really fun. This is a good defense they're facing in this one. Pittsburgh's its own story. George Pickens banged up takes away by far the most dangerous offensive weapon that I think they have. And yet they were, Mike Tomlin teams, man, they find a way. This is just a really challenging spot for them without a really decisive playmaker against a dangerous defense. I don't know. Do we get like a 20-16 kind of game? Is this low scoring, or does Russell Wilson surprise us again and we get a multi-touchdown performance?
Yeah, it's really interesting to consider what the Steelers' offense can do in this game without George Pickens, because last time we saw them, and Pickens was a late game inactive. Like who knows what the Browns prepared for, right? I think the Eagles might, and by the way, Eagles significantly better defense in Cleveland this year. They might come into this with a better plan of like, all right, we can take away some of these check down plays. Maybe we're not threatened as much vertically by Russell Wilson and Van Jefferson on some of those go routes. So we'll see. I mean, Cooper DeJean coming off a rough game, but that was against Adam Thielen, a veteran receiver who knows all the tricks of the trades. The Steelers don't really employ a guy like that, So I think this is kind of a potential bounce back spot for that Eagles defense. And I'll just say this about the AJ Brown stuff, final note on it, because I know people have been frustrated by him in fantasy. If you look at like every efficiency metric, yards per route run, explosive plays per reception, EPA per target, a success rate on targets, he's having like the best season of his career. And what should be, I told you before we started recording that I'm writing a piece about like the top of the league wide receiver production being down. And obviously he missed 3 games. They have been very run heavy. All of his like efficiency metrics look like a receiver that should be having a historic top of the league type season. Everything is mostly influenced by spike games. I'm pretty convinced that if the Eagles want to do it, this could be a spike game for AJ Brown, not just because like, all right, let's, squeaky wheel gets the grease type thing. The Steelers play single high coverage at 69.2% of their snaps. That's the highest in the league according to Fantasy Points data by a significant margin. We've actually seen AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts go crazy on this Steelers defense before in his Eagles tenure to like 3 touchdowns. This is typically the type of matchup like, oh, man coverage on the outside, single coverage on the outside. AJ Brown, go route, go route, go route. And those are the routes that Hurts actually throws pretty well. So I wouldn't be surprised if AJ Brown's been an up and down kind of fantasy performer because of the style of a lot of things outside of his control. If this ends up being one of those spike weeks in the first week of the fantasy postseason. Yeah, no, it's a good call. I hope it's right. And the other thing about Brown's season is like, if you're just looking at it in terms of target share, it's fine. He's not, it's not like they're focused elsewhere. He's still among the leaders in that regard. And you're totally right to talk about his efficiency numbers. They're like, he's right there with like Puka Nacua in that very small club of players who's averaging over 3 yards per route run, which is, elite of the elite kind of production. So it has been a great year. It's just a weird vibe right now. Maybe it's temporary. Let's talk through your final game here. Very spicy one as well. Green Bay Packers at Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, I love this one. This is a great way to end a Sunday. Jordan Love is kind of, it's not exactly the way his season went last year, but of course people remember last year's tale of 2 halves, right? Basically all the bad plays were in the first half of the season. This year he came out and like first half of the season, there's 11 interceptions, but he's been really clean over these last few weeks. 5 touchdown passes, 0 interceptions over his last 3 games. He's averaging over 9 yards per attempt in that stretch. His passer rating is 117.3. The team has scored 30 or more points in each of those weeks against a pretty legit schedule. He's doing it without getting Jaden Reed terribly involved. That's become a thing. Reed only has 6 catches for like 50 yards in those 3 games. He does have a couple of touchdowns in there because he doesn't need many touches to do something pretty dangerous. But they get a matchup here with a Seattle pass defense that is all of a sudden pretty good. That team has won 4 games in a row, and they've only given up 5 passing scores, 5 interceptions during that stretch. They haven't allowed a 300-yard passer all season. I'm kind of cheating there because I think they gave up like a 298 and a 290 something, but like whatever. They haven't given up a 300-yard performance. They've held 5 different quarterbacks under 200 passing yards. So Seattle's had a lot of fight. And that's a division leader right now. And obviously the Packers look like, we've seen them go blow for blow with Detroit this year. So they can throw haymakers with anybody. I feel like we learned something about both teams in this one.
Yeah, and I mean, the pass defense in Seattle has been good. The run defense has been even better of late. 7th in rushing success rate allowed since week 8. Leonard Williams is balling out. They've remade their linebacker core. That's going to be interesting against this Packers team that, as of, post-bye, they have been totally content to just take the air out of the football and try to establish the run. And, I don't know if that's going to win this game against Seattle. Really, to me, it's can Green Bay be sort of coaxed out of their shell? One, can the rushing plays not be successful? And two, Seattle's offense, what do they bring to the table, in this one? I mean, you mentioned the kind of up and down nature of the Packers passing game. I would say that the Seahawks passing game, is kind of, I don't even know if it's game to game. It's like almost drive to drive just because they can't really pass protect. And you've mentioned sort of the volatility of Geno Smith. So I wonder about them versus a Packers defense that, I mean, I don't really know. They're another team that's very much like top of the league rushing success rate in the second half of the season and like 31st against the pass. But I don't know if that's more opponent driven or anything else. So I don't know. Very interested to see what comes of this one too. So it's one of the better. It's probably a game where you end up starting a bunch of dudes in fantasy, but I could kind of see it going either way, game script wise.
Yeah, and we've got receivers on each side in DK Metcalf and Jaden Reed, who I think are really just vexing for fantasy managers at this point, right? Because the volume hasn't been there for Reed. There's like Matt LaFleur and others are actually starting to talk about it with Reed. So I feel pretty comfortable that things are going to tilt back his way a little bit. But it's a kind of spin the wheel and see which direction the arrow is pointing kind of receiving core. It's been that way all year. And then Metcalf, and we've been talking about it for a month. We don't have him ranked as highly as JSN anymore. Like JSN seems to be like the point around which this whole passing game has coalesced a little bit. And he's the one guy who's going to get his numbers week in and week out. Metcalf's had a funny year because he's had some near miss touchdowns, like, toe barely out of bounds. He's had some stuff called back. Like he could be having a much larger year. He's had a couple of quiet weeks against Arizona. He basically always has quiet weeks against Arizona. He's still, he's also battling through injuries too, right? So he gets a little bit of credit for doing that. A huge week could be coming at any moment, and he is physically, he's just such a different dude than most other people in the league and at his position. That he can kind of overwhelm any matchup. So I still have hope for him. I'm still starting him in a couple places where I happen to, still be alive despite having DK Metcalf. I don't think he's somebody who's just an automatic bench.
I'm with you. I think this could easily be a bounce back spot for him too, just with the way some of the perimeter corner injuries and things like that in Green Bay. Like I mentioned, 31st in drop back success rate since week 8. I'd be trying to chase that DK Metcalf spike week. And as for Jaden Reed, Tara and I it looks like actually going to talk about him in the second half of the show. So I'll keep kind of some of my thoughts there. So I love it, Andy. This is great stuff. 3 really good games to talk through here. Big time fantasy performances. Appreciate the hell out of you, buddy, and I hope that Roma Dunze gives you another game to just keep you on the hook the rest of the year.
I do too. Oh man, what a good note to go out on. Yeah, I hope that's right.
Oh, buddy, I hope it's right too. All right, thanks again to Andy Behrens, the man, the myth, the legend. We will see you after the dust settles Sunday night for the recap show. In the meantime, we're going to take a break. On the other side, Tera Roberts joins the show to share her make or break players for this week right after this. Joining us now, as she always does here on the preview show, it is Tera Roberts. Tera, what's going on?
I'm good. Fantasy football playoffs are finally here. Scared that it's all coming to an end, but happy. I'm happy we've got no teams on a bye. You get to make those high upside plays. It's just all about winning. That's it. Win or this is it.
Win or it's all over. No pressure. Yes. And no pressure to us to try to deliver some great picks this week, specifically on you, because this is your segment. I'm just hanging out. I'm just teeing things up, and maybe I've got a thought, maybe I don't. Probably a dumb thought if I do have a thought, but let's get into it. Let's get into make or break here, Tera, as we do every single week. We discuss your list of make or break players here. These are, again, we're not saying like start this guy, sit this guy. We're trying to paint the picture of the situation, how much volatility we have to expect, and if there's ever a week to lean into some volatility, Tera, maybe this is the week, considering it is win or go home. And man, there's nobody perfect to talk about volatility with than my guy Jayden Reed. Andy and I were just discussing him in the first part of the show, and sort of a little bit less about him and more about that matchup overall. So I'm super curious for you to continue to kind of pull on this thread here.
Yeah, it's funny that you started it off that way, because I feel like a lot of times when we look at Jayden Reed, we're not categorizing him as boom bust as he truly is. Like, we look at an Amari Cooper and we say, we know that this guy is going to get us 30 points or 3. There's a wide range of outcomes here. Even on a lower level, we look at a Marquez Valdez-Scantling and know that it's a touchdown or bust kind of situation. But I feel like we don't give Jayden Reed the same kind of treatment of a guy that can legitimately finish as the overall wide receiver 1. It's not that hard for him. He has the volume. He has the talent. He has the quarterback to do so. He is the team's wide receiver 1. But at the same time, he has straight up a floor of 0 points. And that was... that was difficult to swallow last week, fresh off 0 fantasy points. And it wasn't as if it was because, sometimes you'll get those weird games where a running back will fumble and they've got 0 points or negative points like that. No, we had no receptions, 1 single target for Jayden Reed. Kind of disturbing when you think about it. He's not a high volume guy in the sense that he is going to garner 10 targets on a regular basis, but he is a talented player that can make big plays and get volume through yardage. So he's got a variety of ways in which he can have that true massive overall wide receiver 1 upside. It's just a matter of accepting the fact that his floor is extremely low, and sometimes it feels like there's no true way to predict it, because it's not as if he's a player that you can slot and say, okay, good matchup here, boom week for him. He can thrive in his boom week can come in a bad matchup. Yeah. It doesn't have to be such a clear-cut situation for him. So when you're looking at him this week against a Seattle defense that has been a little bit inconsistent, they're not giving up a significant amount of fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, but at the same time, typically speaking, you do get at least one guy against them that does go off and have a strong game. And Jayden Reed feels like he could be that guy this week in a matchup where we've got 2 teams vying for their playoff position here, 2 offenses that have a little bit of inconsistency, defenses that are up and down. It profiles as a game where we could see some high volume and a big boom performance from Jayden Reed. At the same time, Packers could lean on the ground, low targets could be a situation for him. So it's a high-risk situation. But you're looking at him, you're putting him into your fantasy lineup, and you're feeling like this is a guy that, given the matchup in this week and being able to take that risk in the fantasy playoffs, can technically carry you to victory. He is probably the most uncomfortable make or break guy on this list just because of the true volatility of his nature.
100%. And you're right. It's so hard to pinpoint when those matchups are coming, especially because when he's popping off at the beginning of the season, they were using him very differently than they are now. I mean, right now he's basically been a slot only player. Even with Romeo Doubs not out there, he's been a slot only player. He's been a guy that, they're trying to go very heavy personnel. They're trying to run the ball. I do think that because, as I was talking about earlier, that Seahawks defense has been so good lately stopping the run, I think they're going to have to open it up in the passing game. And I know for me personally, Tera, I have 2 Jayden Reed teams. One has a first round bye, so shout out to me. The other one, I'm probably playing him this week. Like I think I'm going to end up going down with the ship here because it's just the boom weeks are so boom, and you're right. Like he also is so used around the goal line as a rushing threat too. So yeah, for me, I think I'm going to end up going down with the ship here. But there's no real way to pinpoint like, okay, this can be a Jayden Reed week, other than the fact that they've talked, LaFleur's talked about like getting him more plays at wide out, actually playing him out wide, playing him more in just like as a traditional receiver. He talked a little bit about that. You think they probably don't want to have him sit on a 2 dud weeks in a row just to keep the guy happy, keep the guy involved because he's so talented. Other than that, I mean, there's really no way to be like, oh yeah, this is a Jayden Reed week, as you just mentioned.
Yeah, the Matt LaFleur point is such a good one because the type of coach that he is, he is more than willing to scheme up specifically to try and get someone going. So coming off of that big, huge bust week, maybe that does make you feel a little bit comfortable that they can look at that and say, okay, we need to retool here, make sure that we're getting our guy some high upside opportunities and targeting him for specific trick plays. Yeah. I mean, we've seen that before. He'll get to the goal line and scheme up something to try and get Christian Watson going. So I could see that happening with Jayden Reed. Given the coaching situation, that makes a lot of sense.
All right, let's get to your next player who's another NFC North wide receiver.
Yes. One for me and one for Andy here. Keenan Allen. Chicago Bears. Keenan Allen. This one is selfishly, Matt. This one is one where I am going back and forth, and I'm probably going to be going back and forth over the next couple of days as to whether or not I am including Keenan Allen in my Scott Fishbowl lineup here because they're this coming off of last week where you felt like after two very strong consecutive top 10 performances, you finally thought, okay, we had the change in coaching, change in offensive coordinator. We've got it feels like a different, more high volume Caleb Williams. Even when they're going down and struggling in the first half, they're pushing high volume, playing catch up here. So you're feeling a little bit more comfortable with it. And then he gives us the nice dud week last week, odd week where it's weird how we get these tandem DJ Moore and Keenan Allen moments where Rome Odunze is nowhere and then it flips and it's just Rome Odunze and the other two disappear. But it does make you kind of look at it and say, okay, let's look at the past month for Keenan Allen and see if we can look at something, because we've got this situation, another situation where we've got a wide receiver who can easily finish in the top 10, a high volume wide receiver that can get as many as 10 to 15 targets on a regular basis. At the same time, he can give you literally lower than a wide receiver 50 performance here and absolutely destroy your week. But the good thing about this matchup, and that makes me just like slightly more comfortable here, is that we've seen this matchup before extremely recently. Looking at the prior matchup with Minnesota, Chicago did play from behind most of the game, but was kind of in reach. They eventually forced overtime. The game was in Chicago, but it wasn't a weather factor game, so that was not an issue there that would kind of tilt the game script. I kind of feel like this is a matchup where it makes sense that we would see a similar type of usage that we saw in it before, and that was an excellent game for him. It was one of his top 10 performances where he had 9 receptions on 15 targets, 86 yards, and a touchdown. Again, that was another one where DJ Moore finished as a top 10 receiver too. So we could be in line for a repeat performance here. It's just a matter of how much you actually want to trust that that Chicago is going to go back to the exact same game script against Minnesota, because it kind of worked. It did. They lost the game, but they pushed it to overtime. It was a lot better than the output that we got last week. So I do feel slightly comfortable-ish in trying to say if I have to turn to Keenan Allen, at least I know how he was used in the previous matchup very recently.
I like the way you said that they're slightly comfortable-ish. That's like anything with the Bears at this point, because it's just so, it's just so spread out. Like I was talking about with Andy, like, can we trust Rome Odunze? I don't think you can really trust him either. I don't really think you can really trust Keenan Allen. Trust is not the right word, right? I think you can, as you said, comfortable-ish. I don't know that there's anything, again, cleanly to map with any of these guys, because nobody's strictly playing one position either. Especially Keenan and Rome are kind of rotating between slot and flanker, which I don't really even love that anyways for either guy, honestly. So it's just, and by the way, like also, Thomas Brown, again, that was, I believe the Vikings game was his first one as the play caller after Shane Waldron was fired. Well, now he's the head coach. Like, maybe he does just go back to the exact same game plan, because he didn't have enough time on his plate to be like, I'm the new head coach. I'm trying to figure out practice time. I'm trying to like call veterans on the team, and like engage with this, that, and the other. Oh, let me also come up with a whole new offensive game plan. There's only so many hours in a day for our guy, Thomas Brown here. So I don't know. I think Keenan's not the worst option, he's not totally done either. He's still a useful player. So it would make, I like the way that you phrase it. Comfortable-ish is how I would feel if I had to play Keenan Allen this week. I'll tell you what, the next player on your list here, if I got to start this guy, I don't know if I'm feeling comfortable-ish. Maybe you have something different to add here.
No, and it's no fun. It's really not. Javonte Williams, The matchup against Indianapolis makes him automatically someone that you have to look at because it's a very good matchup for running backs. The Colts have allowed the 5th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. We've been targeting players playing against them all season long. You say, why would we stop it? Well, you would stop it because it's Javonte Williams here, unfortunately. He does appear to have technically retained the RB1 role, but oh, wait, maybe not because Jaleel McLaughlin came up last week and was the lead back with 14 carries. Not super productive. There's just zero inconsistency in this offense, and I cannot trust on a weekly basis who will be the one that actually gets the vast majority of carries and can even be productive in this backfield. Because even when Williams does get the majority of carries, he's still not entirely productive. In week 12, he was the lead back with just 8 carries. Lead back with 8 carries and managed a -2 yards on the ground. We had Audric Estime. Yeah, the Audric Estime that popped up with the lead role randomly one week. When you're looking at this Broncos backfield, there is zero upside. You can't pinpoint anything that would make you feel comfortable. Even in a good matchup, you don't entirely know who is going to be the lead back here. So, I mean, it's more of a Hail Mary pray and cross your fingers that he at least gets some receiving work and maybe gets a goal line touch. But of the players on this list, I'm not going to lie, this is the one that I am by far the most uncomfortable with. And I hate picking on Javonte Williams because this is probably the 5th time that he's been on this list. He's a repeat performer here.
Not a list you want to be a repeat offender on either.
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all. Especially if it's not the high upside, like, take a chance that it's going to be a boom week here for Jameson Williams. Nope, you're not that player. We're just hoping and praying that you can get us a little bit of a floor here because there's not even truly an RB1 upside. He's hit an RB1 level of production literally just twice this season. And there is no level of comfort with him. It's a Hail Mary that you throw up. I can point to countless other backup running backs that I would trust more than Javonte Williams, inclusive of even guys like Kenneth Gainwell to give you a safer floor than Javonte Williams at this point. I guess including him on this list was more of a, if you have to do it, I understand, but man, this is not a direction that you want to go. Even then, so when you look at the rankings, it's still a guy that's in flex territory. So there are probably some teams out there who are going to have to look at him and potentially start him.
We also have to consider the variable of Denver coming off a bye. And, this is a team that's rotated a lot in the passing game. As you mentioned, they've rotated a lot in the backfield. And there's been several times I felt like they've been trying to get away from Javonte Williams, and then he's popped back up. It's just really been, kind of just chasing the carrot, like chasing your tail if you're a cat or a dog or something like that. It's really been difficult with this Denver backfield. There's really another one that's been no rhyme or reason. So I'm honestly willing to see willing to believe anything about this Denver offense, both in the run game and the pass catcher rotation. Could we see this team, just completely ice out one of these running backs? And, that could be good. If Williams is the guy who's iced out, that would be bad news for Javonte Williams. There's a chance maybe they just haven't seen enough from Estime and he gets no work coming out of the bye after a little self-scouting from Sean Payton. That's totally possible, but zero way of knowing it, at least as we sit here right now. And same in the pass catching core too. I could see Devon Vele maybe getting a promotion. I could maybe see a little more Marvin Mims. Who knows? Honestly, they've been so rotation heavy, or Tera, that none of this happens that I'm talking about, and they just continue to rotate both positions. That's also possible too.
Yeah, it's funny. Vele was a guy that I was tossing around as a potential on this list as well. But I honestly enough, that one's more one that I feel a little bit more comfortable with. This Denver backfield is just so weird because if you compare it to let's compare it to a team like the Jags, right? And we've got Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne splitting carries in such an ugly way sometimes. And if you have a week where are coming off a week of Tank Bigsby having a strong performance, in your mind, you're like, okay, maybe this is something I can roll with. I trust that he's a talented back. Volume can be there. If the game script is right, you can make the arguments and make the logical connection and say that you want to lean into him coming off a strong game. You can't do that at all with anyone at Denver. If I were to even look at Jaleel McLaughlin and say, okay, he had, a strong amount of carries, maybe he's the lead back this week. Nope, you can't look at it and make that assumption either and push him up in the rankings. It's just such a weird situation and a weird backfield.
All right, well, I'll tell you what, the next running back that we're going to talk about here is much more interesting, because his coaching staff seems to come out and just say, hey, this guy's, potentially our starter going forward.
Yeah, I love that. Sincere McCormick, he is one that off of that first game where it looked like he was starting to push his way before, I went ahead and put him in my little waiver wire videos like, hey, I know this guy just dropped back down to practice squad, but I got a feeling that we could see him be the lead back in the next couple of weeks. And hey, here we go. Thank you, Antonio Pierce, letting us know, look, we've moved on from Alexander Mattison. Sincere McCormick is our lead back. It didn't take him a Mike McCarthy and Jerry Jones level of thought process to come up with, this is clearly the better back and this is our RB1 that we need to go with here. So shout out to the Raiders for at least making that choice there. But it quite frankly, it hasn't even been close. And when they say he's the lead back, I feel like this is something we can absolutely trust, because if you compare the statistics, obviously you can't look at, next gen stats for Sincere McCormick, but if you look at Alexander Mattison, it's just bad. Yeah. It's just been absolutely terrible there. And McCormick has been highly efficient with his touches. He's finally shown a little bit of potential upside in receiving. Maybe some checkdowns can happen there. Touchdowns have not been there for him, unfortunately, but that is not his fault. That is more the context of the Raiders offense here, which brings you to looking at a potential game script and saying, okay, we've got this matchup against Atlanta, who theoretically should be able to attack our defense, although Kirk Cousins has been a little bit unreliable on that end. But at the same time, we could see them rely on Sincere McCormick and try to win this game on the ground. Atlanta's defense has been vulnerable to allowing volume on the ground. Sincere McCormick's yards per carry have been excellent so far this season. So I can see a reality here where he gets 15 to 20 carries. They've truly committed to him. They're feeling maybe even, tilting up a little bit more and feeling more confident in him, pushing the volume on the ground, getting some decent movement. I know quarterback situation is something that we have to worry about. Maybe we get Aiden O'Connell and you're put into a better situation with more goal line opportunities. But regardless here, I think McCormick is a safe and clear low-end RB2 with potential upside if he can actually reach the end zone here. I feel like the floor is good. When I compare him to a guy like Javonte Williams, I would feel comfortable saying a good solid 10 fantasy points is very much within the realm of outcome for Sincere McCormick. Don't feel that level of comfort from a guy like Javonte Williams.
Yeah, totally depends obviously on your other options, but I think if you do have to plug him in as a running back too, maybe a higher end flex, I think I'm okay with that. The efficiency has been there, as you mentioned, 5 yards per carry over that Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, and he's been a guy that's, I think, earned the touches. That's for sure. I mean, the other guys in the backfield, as you mentioned, just are not it. They've got to see if there's anything here from McCormick, and that's like I talked about yesterday with Nate. I kind of like a little bit of what they've done with Scott and Norv Turner there as the play callers, especially from a pass game perspective. But McCormick has definitely given them something as a rushing attack. Now, do I love like walking into the fantasy postseason with the running back of maybe a Desmond Ridder led offense? We'll see. Obviously, when it comes to Monday, what the quarterback situation looks like. Do I love that? No, but there has at least been some signals here that McCormick is rising. So that's good to see. I agree with you. I kind of view him as that low end 2, maybe a high end flex type. Depends on your other options. You don't have to play him. He's not like, when we got Garendo off the waiver wire last week, it's like, I think you got to try to find a way to get that guy in your lineup. I don't necessarily feel that way about McCormick, but if you got to do it, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Your final player here, Cedric Tillman, Browns wide receiver, really interesting, especially with David Njoku now dealing with an injury. Man, they cannot like all get these guys healthy on the same timeline here.
Poor Browns. Yeah. But him potentially coming back is big here. And usually when I'm talking about injury situations with these players, I'm always talking about a player that is being pushed into a potential make category because another player is injured. But here we're flipping it and we're saying, okay, we've got Cedric Tillman likely coming back here. Coming off a concussion, generally speaking, you don't have to worry about workload. The only thing that we have to worry about here is how he factors in with Jerry Jeudy in this offense, because technically speaking, he was operating as the wide receiver one there for a while right after Amari Cooper's exit. Now, obviously, we had a bump in production for Jerry Jeudy. He had a nice steady floor, was something that we were looking at on a weekly basis as a potential low-end flex option. But Tillman was the one that was really popping and shining and just absolutely going off there. When he kind of got on that hot streak, had a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 21, wide receiver 1 overall, and wide receiver 17 finished there before getting injured. So you kind of wonder, in the level of production that Jerry Jeudy has had while he's been out, what do we get here between this receiving core? Now we've got the exit of David Njoku that potentially makes things very interesting, because Njoku has been on a hot streak as well. We've got Jameis Winston throwing for aggressive volume. We've got a beautiful matchup with a Kansas City pass defense that has been very favorable against the pass and vulnerable, specifically to wide receivers. We saw it last week with Adam Thielen. Even though Bryce Young had a little bit of an underwhelming game from a fantasy perspective, the receiving core still had a ton of opportunities there. So I feel like we'll still get into a situation where, Cedric Tillman, even though I kind of think that Jerry Jeudy will be the continued wide receiver 1 in that offense, there will be enough volume for him to have at least a wide receiver 2 finish, potentially more if we get into a situation where they're possibly chasing points against Kansas City on this one.
Yeah, you mentioned the Thielen from a couple of weeks ago, and like that's really been the type of receiver that stung Kansas City of late, because their defense has definitely taken a step back statistically across the board. They're not rushing the passer all that well at this point, especially from the edge. They've mostly limited outside receiver production all year. They've been more vulnerable to slot guys, like a Thielen. Obviously, Elijah Moore is obviously the Browns slot receiver. I think he's like a good desperation type play, like a deeper play. But the main target earners in this offense have been Tillman when he's out there, and then Jeudy of late, although it's been kind of close target-wise in certain games between Moore and Jeudy. So I don't know. I think matchup-wise, Jeudy probably has a bit of an edge on Tillman this week, but I still think Tillman's a really good player. And this game could just turn into any game with Jameis. Like, it almost matchup doesn't really matter. Like, he can just push it and we'll see what happens. So I do think he changes the complexion of the Browns receiver room. At the very least, like, he's definitely somebody that's maybe on that wide receiver 3 flex radar, which I think Elijah Moore is kind of on that radar too, but I'd probably prefer Tillman just based on the roles we saw. Again, although matchup, maybe I'm not so sure about that. I think they're kind of in similar ranges, those two guys. And then really what this does is I do think it makes the floor a little bit more shaky for a guy like Jerry Jeudy, just because he's not probably going to have those monster target games with Tillman out there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too. Although, mentioning the fact that we could have extreme volume from Jameis, it does make a lot more sense when you consider the fact that they cannot lead with Nick Chubb on the ground on this one. Yeah. He's been struggling with being productive and efficient. And if there's one thing that this Kansas City defense has remained fairly consistent with, is their ability to stop the run. So I would not be shocked, even if it's not a high scoring matchup and it's still close and Kansas City is still, eking one out at the end on a field goal, a Hail Mary, whatever. We could still get a 40-plus attempt game from Jameis fairly easily on this one.
All right, so those are your make or break players for Week 15. And with that, let's toss it to our keys to winning, presented by Toyota, the official automotive partner of the NFL. And for Week 15, the first week of the fantasy postseason, we got to pick you some guys here. They're going to make the difference in your flex spot. Got to get a win this week, Tara. As you mentioned, pressure is on. Who is your key to winning player for Week 15?
It's Adam Thielen. I tip my hat on that one a little bit. He is back. He is back. And one thing we know about Adam Thielen, when the legs are fresh, he is going to eat regardless here. After a 1-game ramp up following his return from IR, Thielen has been on fire over the past 2 weeks. 17 receptions, 21 targets, over 200 yards, a touchdown. And it's not surprising that this connection is here between him and Bryce Young, because it isn't new. In 2023, when Thielen was earlier in the season, fresh and feeling good, he had multiple top 5 finishes as a receiver with Bryce Young. They have a good connection. Bryce Young trusts him. He is the clear top target right now, the most reliable target as well, facing a Dallas defense that has technically pulled itself together a little bit here, but is still vulnerable against the pass. And we could easily have a repeat performance of Adam Thielen over the past 2 weeks here. He is absolutely someone who I feel super comfortable with flexing, and maybe a little bit more than that.
I am starting Adam Thielen in a disturbing amount of leagues this week, and I'm actually going to stick in that same game for my key to winning player this week. Rico Dowdle, in my opinion, is now an auto start at running back in the fantasy postseason. It's too little too late, but the Dallas Cowboys have beyond sent the other veterans to the bench in favor of just giving Dowdle all the carries he can get. Honestly, he's handled over 70% of the backfield carries since week 12. He's been involved, at least from a route perspective, in the passing game. He's played over 70% of the snaps the last 2 weeks. And if you just look at the results, he's responded really well to this promotion. He's averaging 5.6 yards per carry the last 3 weeks. I think the more you watch him, the more you can feel him get into a rhythm. The offensive line, I think, is playing better than people maybe want to give it credit for in Dallas, even though they've lost Zach Martin for the rest of the season. Dowdle himself is playing for a new contract with this team or elsewhere next year, and I think Dallas should have every incentive to try to evaluate him as the potential future RB1, or at least like part of a two-man committee down the stretch. This week, you mentioned it, he's playing the Panthers, gets a matchup with one of the worst run defenses in the league here in week 15. So there's some big names out there that I think you can probably bench in favor of Rico Dowdle. The opportunity's been there, his play's been there, and the matchup is certainly there this week. That is going to do it for our week 15 preview, Tera Roberts. Big show, a lot of stuff to get through here. Good luck in your fantasy postseason matchups this week.
Good luck to you too. Hopefully we come out winning every single matchup.
I mean, that would be a lot to ask for, but I'm hopeful that it happens. That's going to do it for this show. Thanks again to Toyota, the official automotive partner of the NFL. Next time you hear from us, week 15 Sunday, it's going to be in the books. You're going to know if you're, well, you'll know if you're pretty close. We got 2 games on Monday Night Football. Pretty close to winning your fantasy postseason matchups. But all the games on Sunday will be in the books. Andy Behrens and I will be right back here to break it all down for you. Until then, we are out.